Hey homies, it's Zach, Ohio Skater. Got another video for you guys today. Haven't made a video in a while, but I'm going to try to get back on it, making videos consistently again. You know, I love making videos, and I think it's really fun, and so I want to really get back to it. But anyway, so that's what we're doing right now with a new video coming at you right now. So this video, I might make another video today as well. I have an idea for another video that I might make after this one, but we'll see. But this video is going to be a quick book review, but it's actually going to be a 2-in-1 book review. I actually have 2 books I want to review today because I finished 2 books yesterday. These 2 books are both political. They're both like political theory, philosophy, you know, but they're both like definitely different types of philosophies. You know, some would say sometimes they're opposing philosophies, but I sort of try to combine the two. So we have The Libertarian Mind by David Boaz, and we have Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. Now, when I say I combine two, obviously you guys know I'm a libertarian socialist, so I try to combine the libertarianism with the socialism. And so I think often that means you don't just read libertarian socialist stuff all the time. Sometimes you read libertarian stuff, flat out libertarian stuff, and sometimes you read flat out socialist stuff. And you can relate those two things to libertarian socialism and sort of build your own belief system, you know. So that's how I do it. But anyway, so we're going to start off with talking about The Libertarian Mind by David Boaz. This guy, David Boaz, he is a member of the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank you've probably heard of if you're real into libertarianism. So the Cato Institute. This book actually used to be called something else. It says the updated edition of Libertarianism, a primer, with a new preface. So this book had a different title a while ago. It was called Libertarianism, a primer, but this new edition is called The Libertarian Mind. And so this guy is not an anarchist. He is more of just a normal libertarian, like a classical liberal, for sure. And he talks about the history of liberalism, classical liberalism, and what it originally stood for and how it used to be like libertarian and stuff like that. And he kind of makes it modern, talks about it in the new society in our current day. So he discusses, what he talks about is the civil society and the market process, and how this is a better solution than typically doing things through the government. The civil society and the market process being private individuals and private organizations and private groups outside of the government doing things voluntarily, you know? So yeah, civil society and the market process. And he talks about problems with big government and statism, and he goes issue by issue and talks about various issues. So some of the issues he talks about is like education, basically how the government spends a shit ton on education and kids aren't actually learning in these public schools. On public education, kids aren't really learning a lot, and talks about bad test scores, how test scores aren't really improving despite how much more and more we spend on it all the time. So he promotes private schools and homeschooling and gives some solutions about maybe tax credits so poor families can send their kids to private schools, stuff like that, and definitely promotes homeschooling too. And he talks about how private security can work better than government police. And specifically with government police, he talks about the failure of the war on drugs, how it's been a disaster, and we spend more and more money on, especially federal police agencies, to police things like the war on drugs and the war on terror, and it's just not even working. And specifically with the war on terror, he talks about war and how terrorism is only happening in response to our wars, you know, and so the more we go to war in the Middle East, the more there's going to be terrorism. It's a response to our actions, and so he's definitely pro-peace and doesn't want any war. But yeah, in terms of drugs, he talks about legalizing drugs. He wants to legalize even hard drugs, basically saying the government can't decide what we put in our bodies, and policing drugs has been a failure. We aren't able to police it effectively, so legalizing even hard drugs. He talks about private communities and how people can voluntarily form private communities with their own rules, and how you can have all sorts of different communities with different rules, so there's something for everyone. And at the end of the book, he talks about like a framework for utopia. How utopia is impossible, but you can have a framework for utopia, which is various utopias, different private communities with different rules. You can even have a socialist community with its own socialist rules, and how this is the best system because everyone has different ideas of what utopia is. Sort of echoing Robert Nozick. He mentions Robert Nozick, and he even talks about environmental issues and how environmental energy resources can be used more efficiently by private individuals, and how land is better taken care of by private individuals and private companies because they have an incentive to take care of it. And he talks about the tragedy of the commons and stuff like that. And he basically talks about the main point he's trying to get at is the basic function of government is to protect our individual rights and defend us from aggression, and government should not go beyond these duties. So yeah, it's a very good book. It's got everything you could want in a libertarian book. It talks about every single different classic libertarian issue. It's got, the guy's moderate, but like it's not boring. He seems very rational, like level-headed, like he's not crazy, you know, which I like stuff like that. Like I like stuff that is rational and that is sober-minded and that is not just over-the-top crazy. So I definitely recommend this book. It's really good. The Libertarian Mind, David Boaz. So there's that. And then the other book, Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. You may know Richard Wolff from his videos on YouTube. I certainly do. He has videos on YouTube where he talks about socialism, and his whole thing is creating democratic workplaces and creating a democratic economy and stuff like that. But he talks about like all of socialism. Like he talks about the history of socialism, and he says there are basically two types of socialism. There was what Lenin called state capitalism, and then there was social democracy. Now, state capitalism still has the employer-employee dynamic of capitalism, but in state capitalism, the employer is now the government. And so the government employs everyone, and it incorporates planned economies that are planned by the communist parties, you know. And then social democracy is, he talks about as an actual form of socialism. Social democracy is, he says, and he basically talks about like regulated markets with welfare states and how this is actually a form of socialism, could be considered. He talks about how in history, the first type of socialism, state capitalism, was what was referred to as communism. And the second type of socialism, social democracy, was what was referred to as socialism historically. The difference is sort of between the words communism and socialism. And he goes into the history of both Russia and China, and talks about how we should learn from their experiences and stuff like that. It's very interesting to hear his take on these histories and talk about how ways we can learn from them. And he talks about even how fascism and anti-communism, like McCarthyism in the United States, tried to purge socialism from their countries, and how socialism definitely faced some setbacks because of these attempted purges of socialists in various countries around the world, fascist countries, and in the United States with McCarthyism, and even America's foreign policy, where we tried to prevent socialism in other countries around the world. Like you could talk about Nicaragua, stuff like that, you know, the Contras and all that stuff. And he talks about, so he also talks about phases of history, like Marx's phases of history, phases of development. So you have slavery with the slave-master dynamic, and feudalism with the lord-serf dynamic, and then he compares it to capitalism with the employer-employee dynamic. So how these small groups of people subjected the majority of people to their control in the various economic enterprises of history. And he talks about how even in the transition from feudalism to capitalism, there was a lot of trial and error with different capitalist experiments rising and falling before capitalism completely takes over. And so he's talking about how it's the same thing with socialism. You have social experiments rising and falling before socialism will take over in the future. And so he talks about how a current day, modern day 21st century socialism is different from the 19th century and the 20th century socialism. He talks about 21st century socialism as focused on worker cooperatives and creating a democratic economy and making workers their own collective employers, getting rid of this dynamic which is employer-employee and was lord-serf and slave-master, and just making the employer and the employee one with the worker cooperative, the employees being their own collective employers. And so he promotes worker cooperatives and says basically that that's the future of socialism, and that's what we should be focusing on going forward. And he talks about how also we'll have to figure out how these co-ops will relate to the government and the consumers, maybe giving consumers a democratic say in the cooperatives, and how government and how what the dynamic will be in terms of government and cooperative in the cooperative economy, and how we'll have to deal with that. And yeah, really good book. I think it's really chill. It's a really chill read, and it's really relaxing and actually enjoyable. It's a very enjoyable read. Both of these books are chill. They're not too intellectual. They're not like snobbishly intellectual. They're written so that anyone can understand them. But they do make a lot of good points. You don't really need to be all intellectual to make good points. I mean, these guys both talk about history and philosophy in an entertaining way, in an understandable way, and it's very approachable. And I enjoyed both of those books. And like I said, I'm a libertarian socialist, so you can't only read libertarian socialist, specifically libertarian socialist things all the time. So sometimes you got to read straight up libertarian things and straight up socialist things, and see where they intersect to sort of create your own libertarian socialism. So anyway, really good books. I finished them both yesterday, and I definitely recommend them both. And I hope you enjoyed the video, and like, comment, subscribe, and have a good one. Peace, homies.